Hey guys and girls, welcome to LinkedIn Local Karachi. Can I ask everyone to actually come and find a seat, please? To everyone joining us on the live stream, thank you so much for your patience. Welcome to Karachi time. Everything runs about 20 minutes late, if you're lucky. Otherwise, it can be, yeah, longer. Today, we're going to kick off our LinkedIn local event with a guest speaker who's actually gone the extra mile, literally. The commute from his day job is about a 2-hour flight. So Lawrence Bilson has actually flown in from Dubai just to talk to us about data and analytics and some of the interesting developments that are taking place in the world of data and analytics. So I'm going to leave it to Lawrence to introduce himself. But please welcome Lawrence Bilson to Karachi.
Hello. Is it working? Is the microphone on? Okay, hello. I'm going to stand here. Okay, thank you for everyone for coming and the warm welcome for Karachi. It's my first time here, and so far the experience has been a very valuable one, and I hope that continues. So I work for a company called CRIF. So if I bring up the map of where we exist, it gives a good understanding of who we are and our reach. So we are primarily a data-driven company where we have credit bureaus, we have credit services, credit risk management, and banking solutions. We are celebrating this year our 30-year anniversary, so established in 1988 in Bologna in Italy, and it's been a real success story. So it started off with a credit bureau which offered services to Italian nationals for them to avail credit with new banking services back in 1988. And then it established from there to trade finance, business information in Italy, until I think it was around 2005, 2006, when CRIF first looked at international markets. So the European market at that time, which was the strongest in Italy, was currently saturated for CRIF, and they looked at how they could offer services and information outside of Italy and to other markets. And that brings with it many challenges, many opportunities, but many challenges. So they started to move out across Europe, and as you can see on the map, there isn't a timeline for this map, but I think we first went to the US, acquired some companies there, did some things similar there with data and analytics. Where it got interesting was when we came to the Middle East market. So the Middle East market has some very specific idiosyncrasies, which are unlike anywhere else in the world, and it's amazing. Some of them make for more agile contributions, some make for more limited and restrictive restrictions. But in general terms, it's an exciting market to be in. We had some really good success. So my microphone's gone up. So we established the Al Etihad Credit Bureau in the UAE, which was a federal credit bureau, at the same time as the Thailand Credit Bureau. So it was around 2012, 2013. Within 1-2 years, the UAE Credit Bureau was fully established, fully shared from all the subscribers, from all the banks, and was a very good established credit bureau. Thailand, even now, still is slightly behind. There's challenges with getting subscribers on, with getting people to understand the usage. So what that tells me is although we see the Middle East as an emerging market, it's actually it's a well-established banking market which is actually using new services. So it may be emerging, but it has a good experience and a good platform to start from. So it's not true emerging markets. We now look towards different areas, and we were going to Levant, to Lebanon, to Egypt, and looking at those different types of markets, and also to Pakistan. So one of the main reasons for looking at Pakistan is geographically very close to the Middle East, part of the Middle East. Some very similarities with banking opportunities, how the Middle East has evolved. A good population that's digitally savvy and digitally aware, which fits in well with our product sets. We see some similarities, maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's not, with Egypt. So we're already working in Egypt, similar population size, similar demographics in terms of age-wise, who are people that are moving up into the bankability from an age perspective, and coming directly online to banks through digital acquisition and mobile phone usage. So we see some similarities with markets that we've already established in Egypt. I just want to touch on the point, so I'm going to go to this so that you can read some of the services and solutions that we offer. I just want to touch on the point that everything that I've spoken about is focused primarily on consumer banking, consumer credit, consumer debt, and lending and solutions and services. But we also offer very strong SME, business, commercial credit lines, commercial acquisition, which is again adds another spectrum to the challenge. So where you assess an individual, there are sometimes problems with assessing that individual, but you can always get hold of that individual, and you can always try and understand, and there's always a footprint that's left somewhere. When it comes to commercial entities and commercial lending, commercial banking, then it can be a new establishment. Then you're looking at subjective lines. You're looking at data points which might bear no relevance to what you think would exist in banking. This is important for B2C, but it's also very important for trade finance. So where it's going B2B. So where I want to avail some credit to a customer of mine in the trade finance, maybe for 30 days, maybe for 60 days. So we've got some considerable experience there in this market, especially in UAE and Saudi, where for the SME segment, it's seen as an important segment for the growth of those countries. They represent, in Saudi, there's some statistics that suggest that it's 90% of businesses registered in the kingdom are SMEs, which, the contribution to the GDP, might not be similar to 90%, but is a significant contribution. Okay, so if we look at our primary remit in terms of what we do, probably a lot of it I've already covered. It's credit. Where we see challenges that we help customers overcome in their credit, and I'm going to have to keep turning around because I can't remember what I've written on the slides, but it's in new credit origination. So new credit is how you understand that customer, consumer or commercial entity, how you understand who they are, and ultimately their willingness to pay back the credit that you've lent to them. So there's one thing identifying them, but then you have to try and plan and predict what sort of life cycle they're going to take through your bank or through your custom, for them to ultimately settle the debt that they've borrowed. And during that, you want to retain them. So we know that in the UAE, it's an aggressive market in terms of credit lending to consumers, and it's a constant top-up market. So people are jumping from bank to bank. So you've got to assess them, you've got to identify the risks, but then you've got to retain them. You've got to keep the customers in. So new credit origination, customer management. So this is obviously includes retention. But it also includes how you monitor that customer, how you understand the evolution of that customer as they're onboarded with you. So as they're paying back the money, as they're banking with you, as they're availing some service that you have offered to them, is there an opportunity to cross-sell, to upsell? Is there an opportunity to understand, some specific needs that they need? Is there some ability to look forward, to move them from the location? Maybe they're always banking in a certain area but living in another area. Can you help the customer as much as you can? and that all comes from data that you acquire whilst you're servicing them. And then collections. Collections is, I spent 5 years of my life in collections, and it's a very interesting topic and has huge similarities globally in terms of ultimately you want to pull in the debt that you have acquired if that customer hasn't paid. I see collections specifically in this region being maybe more about customer retention. So it's you want to collect that money, but you don't want to lose that customer. So they may have dropped, they may be 30 days overdue, but I don't think that means that they're not going to pay. So where we see maybe in more established markets, in Europe and in the US, when somebody falls into collections, they remain in collections. So they might be paying back and they might bring some money back in, but the next month they drop, and then the next month after that they drop, and it's only going to be a consolidation loan from another provider that usually fulfills their needs. Maybe in this market, because the values are less, because the credit is a new concept, I think a collection should be less aggressive, because once you get the money back from them, you want to be able to continue to serve them and to provide them some more services. I've put regulations on collections because it's an interesting topic at the minute with IFRS 9. So IFRS 9, a new regulation that has been written, or not so new now, but it is coming into force now, where you have to provision, you have to understand the lifetime PD, you have to understand what that customer is going to do. So you have to use analytics, you have to use data to try and predict, and that helps with regulation. So an important point to put on there. Okay, banking characteristics. So this might seem critical to the way that banks are behaving currently, and I don't mean it to be critical. The reason that I've put it is because I think that what we need to do is evolve, and especially when we're looking at new markets, we need to evolve in terms of how banks can better do things. So currently we have. I'm going to go through them all. So I'm going to stand over here. We have banks measure consumer credit risk using basic qualifying criteria. So this is a common trait, and it's proven quite well in other markets. You can be quite predictive about how people pay back the credit that they borrowed, or even how they behave when they're banking with you, by using historic trends from other people that have got similarities and have borrowed similar amounts and bank in the same way. So you're able to assess someone, and that assessment can be very predictive, and is regulatory recognized criteria for predictive analytics. But there's probably better ways of doing it, and there's probably, if you're starting up now and you have the ability to look, there might be alternative data sources, there might be alternative ways in terms of identifying someone, validating someone, and predicting what their behavior will look like. Currently, banks exclude specific customer segments, so we were talking about it earlier, but it's very relevant. Banks, and it's the same, I'm going to touch on this point with fintech also. So with the two, they only want to be profitable. So banks, obviously, they want to make money. And historically, how they've done that is they've taken the low-hanging fruit. So they've taken the people that are seen as the most profitable customers, and they've offered them the services. And they've customers that are seen as in the grey areas, so outside of that, they've actually charged them more. So they may have less and they may be borrowing less, but they get charged more. So it's the concept that, it has worked, but to me, when you look at it and you stand back and you look at it, it can be seen as a strange concept, and maybe one that can be understood at the time because there's limited data sets to be able to understand them. But now that we have access to other data, there's more possibilities out there. Banks find it difficult to monitor and maintain customers, so that goes back to the customer management. So banks are unable to really identify and treat customers as individuals. That's what I want to get across here. So I log into my email account, it knows who I am. I log into my Facebook account, it knows who I am, what I've been doing, what my friends have been doing. It feels more personable. When I go into my bank branch or call them up on the phone, they don't know who I am. They don't have the information up on the screen. Even if they did have the information up on the screen, are they able to understand, what I'm doing, what my needs are? No. I mean, all they understand is the last 4 transactions that I made on my credit card, and the fact that I have a payment coming up in a few days, and how would I like to settle it. So people are now more aware that there's data available to be more personable, and that is very important. That's going to be very important for the future of banking, because it's the customer mindset. If they feel that you know them and feel that they're comfortable with you, then you'll stay with that bank and you'll constantly use that bank. Established markets have historically existed with minimal risks. So this is true, but the emerging markets, they have to adapt. So emerging markets, because of the idiosyncrasies of those markets, they're going to have to adapt. They can't rely on the historic banking processes that existed in Europe in the early 2000s. External credit bureau data is useful but can be expensive and not inclusive. So I don't want to sound critical of credit bureaus, because we have 22 credit bureaus globally. So they are a font of knowledge, and they are very, very useful. But they do have limitations, and they can't be solely relied upon. And in 10 years, credit bureaus have to evolve. So we've got other technologies coming in that can take the place. So they can't remain static data repositories. They can't remain closed to a subset of subscribers and not allow the visibility from people external to those credit bureaus. They've got to remain competitive. So we come from certain regions where there's little access to data, and therefore the data from the credit bureaus is seen as more valuable, and therefore the cost is set at that. So the value in the data sets the cost for that credit bureau. And what that does is that reduces the use of the credit bureau, because the cost becomes an inhibitor. And then that means that people are bypassing something that is useful to them purely for the cost. So there needs to be a balance there, and there's better ways of doing it. It's an important asset to have as a credit bureau, but there's other ways that need to be considered as well. Which comes into ignoring a wealth of data available. So, can I come on here? Yes. So banks actually have a lot more data, capture a lot more data than what they're using. So they have data from when you walk in the branch, of data from when you call up the customer services, your voice, the way that you're using your voice, the way that your gait when you walk for footfall, the amount of traffic, the places that you're banking. All this information is ignored. So it's a huge amount of data. It's a huge wealth of data for the banks, but it's ignored. It's unstructured data. So it's difficult for the banks to really identify it and use it. But as technology grows, servers get faster, data is able to be processed at faster speeds and much quicker. As all this evolves and grows, then the ability to utilize this wealth of data can become important. And trends might be seen in utilizing that data. So banks need to evolve into that. I put it down as a specific banking characteristic. And then the two final ones are ones that maybe we all recognize. Long lead times to a decision. I've put down 20 days. It's stats that we have from GCC Market. And high cost. 75% of the total credit cost comes from the origination process. So you've got to onboard them. So you've got to pay for a relationship manager. You've got to pay to acquire some data from a credit bureau. You've got to have the investment in the systems, in the solutions that are able to process the workflow to make the decision to do the scoring. But it's still a high amount. It's a huge chunk of your cost, and that's not a cost for the bank. That's a cost for the consumer. So as a consumer, I look at that and I think, wow, the banks can do something better there and should do something better there, which means that I can borrow for less cost. So currently, banks are slow and expensive to acquire credit from. Okay. So what we have here is the data points that are available to banks for them to use. So I have structured to unstructured data. It's going to become relevant later. And then internal to bank and external to bank. So what we have here is this is the data sets that are currently being used in credit decisions. Basic demographics. So easy one to identify. You have a national ID card where you have the age of the customer. You're able to identify marital status, number of dependents, easy questions that the bank are able to collect. And it is primarily this and the transactions. So I'm already banking with that customer, maybe from a current banking perspective, or savings or everyday banking and payments. I'm making transactions. Where am I making those transactions? What are the level of those transactions? What are the characteristics of those transactions? Do I already have credit? Do I have a credit card or a loan or some short-term loan with that bank already? If I do, how am I paying that loan? So am I paying that loan on time? Am I paying it? How am I paying it? Am I paying it with cash? Am I paying it as a bank transfer? And each market is very different for that. These are the core to what goes into making a credit score. So one of the areas that CRIF work very strongly on is we provide analytics to assess all the data that's available here, which is a considerable amount. Maybe there's 200 specific data points in these two bubbles here. And from those 200, I might be able to pull 10 that are relevant to the prediction of credit going forward. And then the other unstructured bit, I'm going to come this side, is I can get information from other banks' credit bureaus, which is important. So is that consumer or business? Are they over leveraged with other customers? Do they have many different banking relationships? What are those banking relationships? How are they making payments to those banks? Do they have credit with them? Do they have payments with them? What are they doing with those? Insurance as well. So in certain markets, we have data repositories, similar to credit bureaus, where there's insurance data which is kept, which again is another valuable asset to be able to assess the creditworthiness of an individual. Then in certain markets, we have government agency data, particularly important on commercial lending. So you might have tax returns, you might have information that the government store on salary, you might have company establishment, your employer details on those, which might be relevant to you as an employee, because the ability for me to pay back my loan is directly proportionate to me getting paid from my employer. So these are the data points, and it's considerable, and it's proven successful, and can be quite predictive, and is suitable for regulatory compliance. What it looks like. So a generic, I put this together, not entirely made up, but it's an example of an assessment that would go through. So you'd have some data that would come in from different portions of those bubbles. Then you would have some calculations, and then we would have an output. And in this example, the output for this is a score. And a score is useful because you're able to order rank that individual. So you're able to place where they are in terms of, and where you want to be, so who you want to lend to. So sometimes it can be, the output can be a decision, but sometimes the output can be a score, and there's other examples. So here we have the input data. We have payment history, as we discussed, level of debt, negative information. So you can sometimes get some negative information. That can come from the government data repositories. It can come from the credit bureau. Maybe there's another area to get negative information from, which we can discuss. Delinquency levels. So if you're overdue on any loan account, if you're dropping through, if you have an overdraft, it's important. Demographics, as we discussed, age, marital status, nationality in the GCC is very important, maybe not so much here. Number of providers, active account flag. And then in the calculations, we work all this out in their trade lines, their delinquency, their utilization, and then we come out with the score. So this is the way that a current process is achieved, and based upon these limited data sets and these limited calculations and this score, a bank then decide whether they're going to give a credit card to that consumer, and if they do give a credit card, what level of the credit card it's going to be. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's simplistic, but it's a good system, it's robust, but it has some problems. So what we see now in almost every market is we see financial technology taking a much stronger position. So we see financial technology extending into the banking space. So, I mean, it still has the same problem with this low-hanging fruit. So the fintech companies are going for the profitable customer. So therefore, they're offering certain services, but only to the same subset that the bank are chasing for, which has some problems. But it shows that the banks are investing. So what this table is telling us is that where banks are investing, their CapEx. So it's a percentage share of the banking CapEx, and it doesn't have to equal to 100 because there's treasury, there's other areas, there's branches, there's operations where investment might come from CapEx. But what is specific to us is the customer segments, retail, commercial, and large corporates, and then account management and deposits, lending and finance, payments, financial assets, and capital markets. So large corporates, almost zero investment in financial technology into the large corporates. It makes sense. Assessment of large corporates, managing of large corporates is a very relationship process, and it would be very difficult and would take time to automate that process. Ultimately, what we're trying to get to here is automation and making faster decisions better for the customer. So we can see less investment on the large corporates across all segments. Commercial. So as you can see, account management and deposits, very little investment for commercial. Lending and finance are quite a considerable amount, which is surprising. So what this says is, and this is a global stat, but what this says is that banks are looking at that segment of commercial activity, and they're saying, yes, we can automate it. Yes, we can add some additional benefits that would be suitable for that segment, and therefore we should invest. Same with payments for commercial. So they obviously see some sort of problem with payments, and therefore the investment is reasonably high. Not so much on the financial. But then we get to retail. So retail is this sweet spot, as it were. So this is where fintech really, really does play a part, because the numbers, the volumes are considerably higher. The data available is significantly more, and you have the ability almost to automate. I mean, in certain territories, we have seen automation, credit cards which are approved online or through telephone within seconds, and a real decision, not a decision in principle. A real decision, pulling data points, made in seconds. So retail is the sweet spot, and where you have large populations, where you have competitive banking markets, what you really want to do is you want to be the bank that's able to understand that individual, assess that individual, and make a good decision. So it makes sense that, and this is globally, but it makes sense that that a lot of the investment is happening in the retail space. So what can we do better? So, and it's easy to say we can use big data, but what is big data? So, like I said before, we now have the ability, the technology ability, and the data captured to be able to have huge amounts of data available to us. So everything that we do from on a daily basis, we leave a huge footprint behind online. So we have this, you know, we have to give up, and we accept it. We give up our data because we're going to get something back. So we give up our data to Facebook because we get some knowledge back from them. We get some ability to share, and we're happy. It doesn't feel like it costs me anything, so we're happy. We give up data all the time. We're leaving a footprint behind all the time, and the servers are now capable of storing that digital footprint and specifying it's for me and linking up. Everything seems to be linked. So, you know, I can go to one site and to another site and it recognizes me. There's cookies that follow us on the internet that, you know, other people are able to read. We know that they're there. We know that we can delete them, but we keep them because it doesn't mean anything to us. It's for us, it means that a certain data column is filled in, you know, when I want to log in somewhere. So I accept it. But it is giving up a lot of data. With all of this data, and with all of this technology ability, storage, CPU power, we're able to mine that data and understand a lot more about an individual than we ever thought that we could before. So it opens up a whole world of potential, which allows us to, if I focus on banking and credit, because that's for me what makes sense, it allows us to individualize an assessment. So we can really look at that consumer as an individual, and we can try and look at the traits that other people similar to that individual have followed to help us to make a better decision for who they are. And it helps with risk-based pricing. So it's a common one, but it's a complex calculation. It helps with reducing losses, which is ultimately what every bank wants to do. These are the, to me, the impressive ones. It helps us with the unbanked. So people that aren't banking, and therefore the slide before where we showed, they're not banking, but they want to bank. How do I assess them for credit? Well, you know, the data has to be here. Fraud. As banks move more to digital acquisition and more to less customer facing and more onto the side of faceless banking, which is, you know, the customer wants. They want faster transactions. It opens up those banks to fraud. And how do I identify fraud if I'm not seeing anything? It can only be in the data. So all of this comes out from the data. And an important point to mention before this is I a while back worked at another company which ran credit bureaus, and they had a specific department that looked at competitors. So back in 2005, 2006, we had a few credit bureaus, and they said, what's going to happen in 10 years? Who's going to be our competitor in 10 years? And this is before the birth of big data, but the primary competitor that was identified was Google. And it was a completely wild concept at the time. This is 2005. Google were capturing a lot of data, but nothing related to financial transactions, nothing related to the financial industry. But it was identified then that they are collecting so much data that this data will become valuable and will potentially have some bearing on the traits and the behaviors of individuals, which could then be used for financial assessments. And maybe the department that came up with that were astute at the time. Maybe they shouldn't have specified a specific company. So yes, Google, big, still exists, but might not exist next year. So it's not so much about the actual entity, it's about the process and the flow that they follow that is relevant. So it's more about, for me, it's search engines. In that case, it should have been search engines. Google can come, Google can go. Facebook can come, Facebook can go. But something that captures the data that they're doing, so social media or search engines, are relevant and should be utilized in the credit assessment process. So where can we get data from? I've given two away. This is not a slide I drew, and I'm not sure where to give the relevant notary, but this is a relevant slide of the internet in 10 seconds. So it's one element of where we can get data from. This is big data. And I looked at this is 2017 stats. If I looked at this in 2015, it's halved, almost halved. So in those 2 years, from 2015 to 2017, everything on here is almost doubled. So 2018, it could have doubled again. We're not sure. But this is the footprint that people are leaving behind. This is the information that you and I have left on the internet because of the transactions that we're doing, which are not relevant to financial services. Some interesting ones that are, Facebook's the obvious one, so a lot of things that we're doing on Facebook. The posts that we're making, the information we're leaving, the sentiment that we have, it's there. WhatsApp, that's a huge success in terms of growth. What are we saying on WhatsApp? What's the information that's available on WhatsApp? There's a wealth of information in there. Amazon. So Amazon's becoming bigger and bigger, this Goliath of internet shopping. How much data do I leave behind on Amazon? How much data is available there? Well, address information is available here. I might have 6 addresses here on Amazon. Is that relevant to credit assessment? If it's accessible, I think it is. Google's there. LinkedIn's there. LinkedIn is very useful. It's useful for designation, but it's particularly useful for fraud and for identifying the honesty of individuals. Is their LinkedIn profile the same as the information that they provided for their credit assessment? YouTube can hold some relevant information, difficult to assess, but can hold some. Twitter, it's tweetering around on there. It sometimes grows, it sometimes doesn't. There was a similar slide like this which showed the profit of these companies, and all of them are making money except Twitter. But it still exists, so it must be, there must be seen to be some advantage to it. All of this information, a huge vast of information, but completely unstructured. So it's available to me for my credit assessments, but how do I access it? How do I use it? What does it mean? Does it really have any relevance? What Netflix films I'm watching in terms of whether I'm going to pay back my credit card on time? Well, yes, maybe it does. We don't know. We don't know until we start to look at the data and we start to look at the trends. So one particular review that was done in the US was looking at customer service representatives. So customer service representatives in a specific call center, thousands and thousands of them, their payment of a specific utility bill. So they were looking at all these customer service agents and then their payment on this utility bill over a period of 6 months. And what came out from the data was that it was information. The customer service agents that were utilizing Internet Explorer were less likely to pay on time. It's there. The information's there. Does it mean anything? It shows their content. Okay, advantages that big data can bring. So, we've discussed many of these, and maybe I have to speed up a bit. We capture the unbanked. We make more accurate decisions. We reduce costs, and we increase speed. All of this is possible only with the access to the correct data. So only when we have the data is all of this available to us. And I'm going to go into these points, but in slightly more detail. So this is what we started off with, what banks are utilizing. These are the data points that banks are utilizing. Now, this is what the banks can utilize. So in actual fact, this is what the banks can utilize, but we have to start with one stepping stone at a time. So we have social media comments. We have geolocation information from apps that we're using, from where we're traveling, from where we're banking. Telecommunication data from the voice that we're ringing up, the sentiment of our voice that we're utilizing. All this can be analyzed. Utilities data, even within the bank. So this is internal to the bank. Where we had structured data, we have unstructured data within the bank. Video analysis of when they're walking into store. Input from RMs. So RMs are sharing a lot of information about customers, especially commercial lending. That information is relevant, but it's impossible to capture currently without being able to identify the unstructured data. Call center notes, so not necessarily what you're doing at the call center or what you're saying on the phone, but what the call agent thinks that you're doing when they're writing the notes. It's unstructured data, it's held there, and it's important to credit decisioning. So this is the amount of data that can be relevant. I'm going to give 2 examples of how this can be utilized. So, new credit process, mobile phone. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's using the mobile phone. I mean, I only landed yesterday in Karachi, and everybody that I've seen is on their mobile phone, from waiting at the airport into the hotel. Everybody's utilizing their mobile phone. There is a wealth of data that you have on your mobile phone. In certain territories, primarily in Africa, 100% of the credit decision is being done through data that's captured on your mobile device. It might not be what you think. So it might not be the data that you think is relevant, but mobile phone usage is important. The number of calls that you're making makes sense. The battery level may be more applicable to the Africa market. So what we see is people with that are constantly running out of battery, running out of power. Maybe they're going elsewhere to fill up that power. That shows that they are a higher risk. They forget. Maybe they're forgetful. Maybe there's some other information that's behind that. But battery level is a very important one. International dialing makes sense. International travel I've got on there as well also makes sense. The volume of the data that they're using through their mobile usage. The peak time usage. Are they people that don't really care and they're ringing during peak time? All of this information is available to banks to make a credit assessment. The one at the end, SMS messages from banking providers. So what we have had experience of in other markets is there's information in text message on the mobile phone which is accessible for a bank if given the permission, the consent. It's important that you get the consent, and they will give it because it's a credit that they want. But I don't know in this market, but in the UAE and in the other markets that we're working at, on my SMS messages, I have transactions through my current account, transactions through my credit card, payments on my credit card, payments on my bank account, deposits, level, credit. All this information is stored in free text in SMS on my phone. It's a wealth of information which I think currently has been untapped. It's important to know that this is not a subjective assessment. This is proven to be an accurate assessment, utilizing data that's caught on the mobile phone, making a scorecard. So back to the first slide that we saw, making a scorecard with these data points is as predictable as making a scorecard utilizing the existing data points that a bank currently rely upon. And it's important, and it's something which banks need to pay attention to and need to start evolving into that space. One other example I'm going to give you is one that's a hot topic, which is fraud. So moving to big data, moving to digital acquisition encourages fraud. People can hide. Where there's huge volumes of people that are moving from unbankable to bankable, the movement of fraud only increases. Where there's movement of people, there's movement of fraud. And this is fraud internal, external. This is fraud where I inflate my self-worth. This is fraud where I pretend to be somebody that I'm not. All of this is going to increase on an equal level to the bankable space increasing. And then when you move to utilizing big data, that element can play an important part. But the data doesn't lie. So I might lie, but my footprint on the internet does not lie. And therefore, the utilization of big data is very important for fraud. So I'm able to look at anything and be able to identify a lot of information from the big data, which is unstructured data, from application audit trail, external agents, digital channels, chat. There's information there that I'm leaving as I'm applying on a website here and then moving to an IP address and applying on a website here. There's IP addresses that might all be relevant to one individual that's applying multiple times. There's bad data usage. So I can understand the mismatch of data. I can understand when someone's giving repeating and repeating generic answers. I can pick up on known phone numbers. So when I know that a phone number has been used for fraudulent activity, I don't want to make that mistake again. Fool me once, it's my fault. Fool me twice, it's just as bad. Abnormal behavior. Big data can really pick up on abnormal behavior because you look for the outliers. So there's this scatter of information, but where there's transactions which are very unusual, you can immediately mark them for unusual activity. And then the net closes in. So then you only have to assess those data points for looking at abnormal behavior. Inconsistent answers. Application speed. This is one. We have a psychometric score, which we've gone live with. So it's a fully online psychometric score, and I answer questions. What's my favorite color? What does this picture mean to me? What does if school fees are late to be paid, what do I tell the school? And I'm given multiple choice answers. One of the strongest, so the psychometric score is very good, very useful, and is being used by finance houses in the UAE, where there's maybe they're looking at a subprime level of individuals. But one of the main points of the psychometric score is not the answers that we get from the psychometric assessment, it's the speed in which the person does that psychometric assessment. So are they going click, 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 A, B, C, are they making it up? Is a very important element. So I feel that maybe that would be the same applying for a bank account. If someone's going through something too quick, they've done it before, they know something, that it doesn't mean they're fraudulent, but it's an outlier to identify and to follow up to see if they are. Inconsistent answers. So, where they have an answer over here, and then when a similar question comes up, there's a completely different answer. It's standard for fraud assessment. And then the location. So our devices that we use, the way that we access, I mentioned IP addresses before, but the apps that you use, they all are monitoring where you are. They're all looking at where you're going. We work with one bank in the UAE, and they use the app to identify where ATM withdrawals are. So you're not withdrawing from their ATM, but they know exactly where you are. So they've got the app. They see that a transaction is done. They know exactly where you are. So you're leaving this footprint behind, and that location assessment for GPS on apps, on the phone, on IP addresses on the internet browser can reveal fraudulent activity in the credit assessment and management process. Yes, so I think this is my last slide. The power of using new technologies. So in conclusion, quickly, faster and fairer access to funding. So it's utilizing data, digital acquisition, mobile phones, all of this gives me faster access to data, faster access to funding, and fairer. Inclusive credit society. So going back to the point I made at the beginning, I don't think that the person with less should pay more for the credit. The person with less should just be able to borrow less, but the payment should be more. So the risk-based pricing needs to be adjusted for that, and it can be done within the big data. More competition for the availability of data, with the ability to not have to establish a bank and set up a branch and employ a number of employees. Competition for the disbursement of credit is only going to increase, and that competition is good for us, for the consumer, not for the bank. The bank need to change and evolve, but it's good for the consumer, and it makes for a more competitive edge. Displaces the point of credit application. The last one I should have touched on earlier is an important point. I can now apply for credit anywhere. So that means I can apply for credit at the point of sale. So I want to buy a new TV. I can immediately, whilst I'm there on the shop floor, apply for the credit that's of equal value to the asset that I'm trying to acquire. I get that immediate ability to take it home. And the bank get the immediate ability to be able to lend me money and earn a small slice of that. So these are the 5 important points for utilising the new technology within credit assessments and lending. Thank you for your time.